Hello everyone and welcome. It is really great to have you with us, and we can see from what people have been putting on the chat that there's people from all over the UK, which is really great to see. So this is the launch of a new Operation Noah report on church land and the climate crisis, and this is a new area of campaigning for us as Operation Noah charity. My name is Holly Peterson. I'm going to be chairing the webinar today. I'm an Operation Noah trustee, and I'm also a co-founding member of Christian Climate Action as well outside of that. And just to let you all know, because I know that these online events, they can be a bit confusing sometimes. Everyone who's not a speaker is muted. So we've set this up as a Zoom webinar, which means that you can only see myself and the speakers, and I know that people got an alert then saying that it was being recorded, but actually again only myself and the speakers are being recorded as well. Just wanted to make everyone aware of that. But yes, just to give a little bit of a background about this report and this webinar. So Operation Noah have a strong history of encouraging and challenging churches on how their assets are impacting the climate crisis. And our big emphasis so far has been on encouraging churches to divest from fossil fuels so that our churches are not funding the climate crisis. And, as we continue this work in the current months, in the months ahead, we're going to be adding two aspects to this. So first of all, we're going to be adding focus on encouraging churches to invest in clean alternatives to fossil fuels, such as renewable energy. The second aspect that we're going to be focusing on is church land, like we are today, and how that has an important role to play in keeping emissions down. So hopefully, by the end of this webinar, we'll have a solid understanding of what role church land plays and why that is important. So, yeah, and I guess I want to say also that, in this critical time of climate emergency, it's so great that so many of you could join us on this webinar today. And, we're joined by some excellent speakers. We've got guest speakers Hannah Malcolm, we've got Andy Lester. Thank you very much, both of you, for being with us. We've also got Alan Radbourne, who's a guest speaker who's recorded and sent us in a video as well. So we'll be sharing that. So we're going to start off the webinar today by hearing from our guest speakers, and I'll introduce each of you in turn. And then we'll hear from Sharon Hall as well, who's the Operation Noah Campaigns Officer, who's leading on church land use. And Sharon will introduce the new report to us all. So we will, just to give you a bit of an understanding as the format of how the event's going to go today. So we're going to save all the questions to the end of the webinar for a specific Q&A session. So if you do have any questions, please do put them in the Q&A chat box. And yeah, you can direct your question. So please do direct your question to a specific speaker if you're able to. And you'll also notice that once questions have started going in that Q&A chat box, that there's the option to upvote some of those questions as well. So if there is a question that goes in the Q&A box that you actually think you want to be answered as well, then please do feel free to upvote that, and then I'm more likely to see that when we come onto the Q&A part of today's session. But yes, we're going to be sharing some of the links that come up in the webinar as we go along. And also just a reminder that even though we are, for the new people who've arrived, even though we are recording the session, that it's only going to be the speakers who are visible in that recording today. But yeah, I think what we'll do now is that we will introduce our first speaker, Hannah Malka. Hannah is one of our trustees at Operation Noah, and she's been convening a group on church land use. Hannah is a Church of England ordinand, and she's currently writing her PhD on climate grief. Hannah is a member of the Church of England National Environment Working Group, and she's recently edited the book Words for a Dying World. So yeah, I'll hand over to Hannah to introduce the topic of church land use and give us a bit of historical context to that as well. Thank you very much, Hannah.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Holly. I'm going to start with the obligatory. I hope everyone can see my screen and that I'm not just sharing it into the abyss. It's lovely to be with you all. And as we start this conversation together, what I want to do is try and offer some background to how we as a church have thought about land in the past and how we might begin to think about land in the present as we look to the future. And I think it's quite tempting to treat the Anglican Church's relation to climate and ecological questions as essentially beginning in 1990 with the Fifth Marker mission. But the history of our relationship to the land we dwell on is, of course, much longer. The history of the global Anglican Church is a colonial history, and its missions spread at least in part through seizing land to be both a location for the activities of the church and as a general asset. So usually land was taken by the crown and given to the church for mission, but occasionally indigenous people groups around the world entrusted land directly to the Anglican Church, as happened in the relationships between the Maori people of Tauranga, as an example, who gave the Church Mission Society 1,300 acres. Now, unfortunately, this gift didn't shield that land for the purposes of God amongst that people. And in 1866, the Church Mission Society gave the land to the crown. It wasn't until 2018 that the Maori people of Tauranga received a formal apology for this betrayal. So our conversations about land and the church do have this longer history. And of course, the Anglican Church is the third largest denomination in significant part because the British Empire was such an aggressive colonizer. And this land grabbing approach to security is not just a colonial activity. Before the colonies, the origins of the Church of England also lie in seizing Roman Catholic land and buildings. So like any large institution that has political power, land has always meant access to power and wealth. But in this time of climate and ecological breakdown, land and who owns it has taken on renewed existential significance. And that's in significant part why we've gathered today. But of course, even knowing this history and knowing the significance of the land that we own, what exactly we should do with our land remains pretty complicated. And of course, the Church of England across the Communion is not alone in having considerable land assets. Our colonial history means that in many countries, the Anglican Church is a substantial landowner, much of which was land formerly owned by local tribes or kingdoms. So as the climate crisis worsens and access to healthy land increasingly becomes a matter of survival, in addition to growing battles over land for mining, for fossil fuel extraction and deforestation, the church in many places holds the keys of life and death. Now, the picture, of course, might seem less dramatic in our own context in the Church of England, but nevertheless, our land and how we think about it is vital for our work. So why does land matter for the mission of the church? Well, for a few quite basic reasons. The first is that the majority of our work takes place on church-owned land. And along with that, land, of course, helps to fund our mission. It's a major source of income for the church. The church is going through major transformation, and these assets shape the future of our communities. And I think because mission centered around land is scalable. So a church with a graveyard is just as much involved in this conversation as a national body. So land and what we do with it is a question for all aspects of the church community. And over this webinar, we're going to hear from a number of experts and interested parties around different aspects of what we might possibly do with our land. But I want to give some background now to both what the church owns and where our conversation around land use has taken us so far. So what do we own? Very briefly, because you can find all this in the report, around 100,000 acres of rural and strategic land owned by the Church Commissioners, around 70,000 acres owned by Church of England Diocese, around 30,000 acres in the Church Commissioners UK forestry investments, and then there are, of course, smaller areas of land owned by individual churches, and around 500,000 acres plus of mineral rights, which is particularly interesting as we raise the question of fracking again nationally. In this kind of mix, of course, there are substantial property holdings and sites of special scientific interest and priority habitats. And I think our conversation around church land has very recently picked up momentum in really exciting ways. People are listening to kind of urgency around the way we use land and the need for land to be both protected and managed wisely. And there's been a real culture change. And of course, there's a lot of attention on land as well, because suddenly a lot of people have woken up to the value of land, both in its potential for transformation and as a financial asset. So we are seeing real progress, as well as this kind of this challenge as we negotiate how we treat land in the future. So on the screen, you can just see a few examples of the progress that has been made so far. So what I want to do now is just give you, I guess, a very brief framework for some of the key proposals that had been made for how we could think about church land, to help us all to enter this conversation with a little bit of an idea of where we're coming from. So what should we do with our land? Well, should we sell what we have and give it to the poor? Should we save for the future? Should we rewild? Should we build new communities? Now, each of these suggestions contains real merit and has been kind of argued from different corners. And of course, they're not mutually exclusive, but I want to briefly go through each one now. So should we sell off our lands? This might help to fund current and future mission. It could help low-income dioceses who are asset rich, and it might help us to kind of resist a temptation to kind of safeguard assets for the future when we could be using them for the current mission of the church. Of course, the church is already selling and has already sold lots of its land, in large parts the bits with planning permission attached. And one of the questions we might want to ask in our conversation today is, what responsibility do we imagine that we have over the future use of the land sold, particularly land sold with planning permission attached to it? So selling what we have. Another option, maybe we should be saving for the future. We need to safeguard the church's future mission with steady income. And as we know, land is an asset which is going to increase in value. That might mean that we could keep land out of unscrupulous hands. The Church of England is an institution with a long history, both going into the past and going into the future. And perhaps the church owning that land will safeguard it. It's an opportunity to honour existing relationships with farmers and tenants. And of course, as I've said, that land will increase in value over time. Of course, one of the questions we might want to ask is, are we called to do more than weather a storm? Are we called to do more with our assets than leave them lying where they are? I don't think anyone is suggesting we do nothing with them. But if we do things with them in the meantime, what is our responsibility towards that land, and how could we kind of frame it or understand what that responsibility might look like? And this brings us on to some of the kind of active suggestions for what we should be doing with it. And one of the key ones that you'll hear about today is biodiversity. So should some of that land be rewilded, as to use a quite slightly more provocative framing for this suggestion? And some of the key arguments are that it would be a huge carbon sink for a net zero target. It would help tackle national ecological crises and serve local communities. And it would be a kind of witness. But of course, we want to ask ourselves, is biodiversity a mission question? And that's one of the things I hope that we'll discuss today. Church-owned land, particularly in towns and cities, is often one of the few genuinely publicly accessible spaces outside of parks. And land around churches is often also a permeable space where the church community can encounter the wider community. Parish land is land for people, whether that's graveyards, quiet green space, wildlife gardens, or small allotments. So does planting trees spread the gospel? Discuss in the comments. And the fourth option, another kind of proactive option that's been made, should we be building for the future? Some of you may be aware of the Archbishop's Commission, their new housing strategy that they've launched, which recommends that the Church of England uses its land to build truly affordable homes, and seeks to imagine housing policy in practice so it's based on a wonderful list of S's: sustainable, safe, stable, social, and satisfying. And within that policy suggestion, there's the idea that land should have both social and environmental as well as economic benefit. So this is a really interesting one because, of course, the issues of ecology and poverty are related. We are, in our primary identity, creatures, created dependent, and we rely on the rest of creation for the air that we breathe, for the water that we drink, for the food we eat, and for our comfort and for our safety. So any proposal we put forward for land needs to tie these environmental and social visions together. And as a landowner, the church can be a voice for just access to thriving land, rather than contributing to a culture of privatization, whether that's access to the countryside or access to green space in the inner city. So I'm going to kind of give a little summary now. So what steps should we take? How can we ask ourselves that question? Well, given the portfolio of land the church owns, it's likely going to be a mixture of these things. And of course, these proposals aren't mutually exclusive. We can save for the future while also protecting and restoring land. And I think we can take heart that this work will have real significance. One of the things about lands is that transformation of even relatively small areas can have significant impact on the lives of the creatures, both human and non-human, who live on it or near it. So with this report from Operation Noah, we're looking to join in this conversation with the National Church to provide resources and hopeful visions for what might be possible when we think about the big picture of church land, while celebrating small-scale transformations that are already happening across the church. And I want to close with two brief theological reflections. The first is a line from one of our Eucharistic prayers as a reminder of what worship involves. It is indeed right, it is our duty and our joy at all times and in all places to give you thanks and praise, Holy Father, Heavenly King, Almighty and eternal God, through Jesus Christ, your Son, our Lord. It is both the duty and the joy of the church to give God praise in all the times and all the places that we're given. God's abundant goodness is reflected in the land that we share with other creatures, both human and non-human. And these gifts demand careful attention to the variety of communities and ecologies over which the church has direct responsibility, whether that's housing, woodland, marshland, commerce, or farmland. Each of these has its own integrity as a place where the mission of the church can be realized and where the distinctive witness of the gospel of Christ can be made visible. The second brief reflection is related to the first, and it's that we must make our worship holy. As the church, we have at times allowed ourselves to conform to the pattern of this world, to a pattern of death and not life. But we've been entrusted with a story which is one of life and restoration for the whole of creation, which we declare belongs to God, not to the powers of this world. And it's worth remembering, I think, that throughout the church's history, her revival has been preceded by and infused with a longing for holiness, by resisting greed, selfishness, violent thought, speech, and action. But of course, the Spirit is not constrained by us. And if we will not be made holy, if we refuse to worship our Creator in the whole of our lives together, then the Spirit will not rest on us. And so as we begin this conversation, this hopeful conversation about our lands and the possibilities that it contains, I want to leave you with that question. What might a holy vision for our lands look like in all its diversity? And what do you think is holding us back from pursuing it? Thank you very much. It's great to be with you.
Thank you very much for that, Hannah. That's a great question for us to reflect on. And yeah, I guess hopefully that's provided us with kind of, I guess, a solid basis of the context of the report, and also why it's important for us to consider land use, I guess, more generally. Fantastic, thank you very much. So yeah, if you've got any questions on that or any more general questions, then please do pop them. There's a specific Q&A box there for the webinar, so please do put any questions in there. And also, if you want to post anything on social media relating to this webinar, then you can use the hashtag #ChurchLandReport as well. But yeah, I'm going to introduce our second speaker now. So Andy Lester, who's the head of conservation at Rocha UK. Rocha UK is a Christian charity which is working to protect and restore the natural world. They have recently launched a new target to transform 75,000 acres of Christian-owned or managed land to be protected for nature and community. And Andy has 2 degrees, so in ecology and green economics, and has been one of the contributors to this report as well. So I'll hand over to Andy, who's going to bring together the issues of both climate change and biodiversity loss for us. Thanks, Andy.
Thanks, Holly, for the introduction. It's always a challenge to follow Hannah. What a great start and a great introduction. I want to, over the next 10 minutes, to take you on a bit of a journey. And it's one of those journeys which starts in a rather dark place, but I hope it ends in a space which will inspire and bring hope. So the first thing is I want to tell you a little bit about two journeys I've made over the course of the last 2 months. Some of you will know that a lot of my time is spent traveling around the country, visiting Christian centres, landowners, conference centres and farms and estates to find out what they are doing for nature and climate. And over the past few months, the accelerating effect of climate change has become more apparent than ever before. And this was brought home on a trip up to the West Highlands of Scotland just a few days ago, where I was in an area which traditionally had been a mix of pine trees and rowans, with the odd ash tree and a few Atlantic oaks, part of the sort of Atlantic oak forest, which is so familiar with the west of Scotland. But in it were buddleia and gorse and beech trees and hornbeams and maples and various other species which you would expect much further south in a riot of abundance. I looked at a piece of land that somebody wanted to come and show me, which until a few years ago had been a mix of Scots pine and Douglas fir with the odd rowan throw in. And there were over 50 species of deciduous tree growing at the most extraordinary rates. It had become a landscape that was unfamiliar. It was the sort of place where you stand in and think it's great to see nature fighting back against climate change. But when you realised that you were in the northwest Highlands of Scotland, you quickly felt that something was significantly amiss. It was also significant because just a few weeks before, I'd been visiting a project at Windsor Park. And we have a project near there, which is a woodland restoration and renewal project. And it's something that is very close to the heart of this report, which is what do we do with our woodland areas? And over the course of the last 2 years, this particular project has been busily planting native deciduous trees over quite a large area. But this summer, it met with the drought of 2022. And I got a panicked phone call from the owner to say that her trees were in deep trouble. Many were showing signs of extreme stress, and others had already died. And so I did what I think many of us would do when we hear a friend and colleague struggling. And that is I drove up to London and then spent a couple of days supporting by mulching and creating as much water retention as we could around as many trees as possible. We went into emergency mode in and around the Windsor Park area to protect as many species as we could. And the good news, if there is good news to come from this, is that we managed to rescue about 70% of the trees because of rapid direct action. But on the neighbouring land, the story wasn't so successful. So why am I telling you these stories? It's for two reasons. And the first is we're about to encounter the greatest shift and greatest change in landscape in UK history. And the second is that unless we are radical in our response to it, we will lose a vast number of our species, we will lose a lot of our land, and it's very easy to find ourselves in a position where you start to lose real hope. So let me challenge you with three things that we know are going to definitely happen and will influence the UK's ecology over the next 30 years. These are, some will argue, how do you know that this is the case? The science is pretty strong. The first is that we are going in our lifetimes to see the complete melting of the Greenland ice sheet. The impact that will have through the decrease in salinization of our oceans and seas will have profound and as yet not fully quantified impacts on our native flora and fauna, but particularly on our forests. The second is that 1.5 Celsius is not possible. Many of us have been talking about keeping under 1.5, and I, as a scientist, do not believe that is anymore a possibility. I still believe we can keep under 2, which would be good news indeed. But the data indicates that we are too late for 1.5. And the third factor is that we are going to see the sorts of changes that will render some areas of the country just not suitable for native tree planting as we know it. So the plantings of beech and oak and elm and ash and aspens and maples, trees that have been a familiar part of our landscape over the last 500 years, will no longer be familiar in the areas they are currently. So those are three shifts that we know are going to happen in many of our lifetimes. 5 figures to think about as we contemplate that sober reality. The first is that the Church of England, in terms of its land holdings, less than 5% of Church of England land is actually forested, and that's against a national organisation average of 10%. So the Church of England is behind the curve in terms of forestry land ownership within the UK. There is a huge opportunity there, but there is also a waking up to the fact that we could do a lot more as a network. The second fact is that we are losing between 150 and 300 species on a daily basis. The best IUCN estimate at the moment is that during the course of this recording and this webinar, roughly 200 species globally will be lost, and the accelerating rate of loss is particularly profound in temperate areas such as Europe and North America, but it's often the very, very small and the very unseen. The third is a report that came out today that indicated that in our urban areas, we're going to lose about 50% of our tree species. And that is because our urban areas are heating up much faster than our rural areas. But 2 really positive facts to think about before we move on to the what can we do next. The first is that our native trees provide the most extraordinary habitat for an incredible range of species. You take our oak trees, which are amazingly versatile and amazingly adaptive, and a typical 300-year oak will have over 300 species of birds, insects, fungi, moss and lichen living in or around it. The second is the incredible impact that if we get the trees right, we can reduce temperatures in our urban areas by up to 1 degree Celsius. That may not sound a lot, but when you're in a drought situation, a reduction of 1 and maybe more is very, very significant indeed. We can make our urban areas real havens for nature during times of a real ecological crisis. And you're probably sitting there and thinking, my gosh, this is all rather depressing. It is gloomy, but there are times in life where it's actually good to face up to the reality of what is ahead. There is a storm coming, folks, and it is unprecedented. The impacts on everybody on this call will be significant, and our lifestyles will have to change and shift dramatically. We still have a narrow window where we can make choices about what we do with our land that will have profound and lasting impacts for future generations. But if we carry on talking about it and we decide that we're not going to act and act radically, there is a real danger that we will miss the opportunity that we still have. And then we will be playing a very different game in the years to come. So here are the 3 things that I think we should all be working towards as a faith community. The first is new species. The days of traditional conservation have to come to an end. We have to think about species that we can import from Mediterranean areas across southern Britain, or the artificial movement of species northwards to recolonize areas where other trees will be retreating. We have to be very, very radical in the way we do conservation. It means looking to other nations and other continents for help, ideas and support, and planting regimes that are going to make a real difference against drought and against extreme flood events. The second is all about opening up new areas of land. And as Hannah indicated, the church owns a large amount of land, from glebe land all the way through to our cathedrals, all the way through to planted forestry land. And there's an enormous opportunity to look at the nation as a whole and ask the question, what can we do as a church to reforest our nation in a way that inspires community, restores nature, reduces the climate carbon issue, and ultimately brings hope and life to our nation? I believe that our church can really do that, but it will mean a radical overhaul of the way we view land and the way we use land. And the third is all about new ideas. And one of the things that Operation Noah and Rocha and other organizations are very much engaged in is trying to get inspiring new ideas from inspiring new people who are coming up with incredible creativity. And over the last months, I've been visiting vertical gardens, tropical mulching in the south coast of England, olive groves, truffle plantations, all sorts of creative and imaginative projects that are involving plants in a whole different way. We're experimenting ourselves with partners on food forests, creating entirely edible temperate jungles, but introducing Mediterranean species. Things can be done differently, but it takes creativity and it takes radical imagination. So my challenge to you is this. We are at the cusp of a new era. I love the way we talked about ending the Elizabethan era with Queen Elizabeth's passing in the last few days. But we are entering a new era in terms of climate and nature in Britain. And we are going to have no choice but to step up to the challenge. So my question to you is, do you want to get into the boat with us now and radically change our nation for the better? Or are you going to leave it for 20, 30, 40 years in the hope that things will improve? Because if we all do that, they won't. My grandmother said to me, this is my last comment, she was bedbound in the last year of her life. And I remember saying to her, you must feel very frustrated. And she said, no, actually, she said, you know, there are times in life where small is the most beautiful thing, where we know the problems are big. And in my case, she said, all I can do is to pray for those on the front line, those in the spaces, trying to make a difference and trying to radically overhaul the system. But she said, as I pray, I know that whatever happens, we are held by a loving and passionate Father. And this remains his world. It remains his vision for us to be his hands, his feet, his light in this season. And hope is found through practical action. Hope is found through change. And hope is found through radical responsibility. And that is what we have been collectively entrusted with. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andy, for outlining so clearly and honestly the situation that we find ourselves in at the moment and the role that land and church land can play in that. So what we're gonna play now is a short video from another key contributor to the report, Alan Radbourne. So Alan works for the UK Centre of Ecology and Hydrology as their science project manager. He has a PhD in limnology, in carbon sequestration and algal response to nutrient and climate changes. He also has been involved in peatland, salt marsh and soil carbon projects. So we'll get up the video, and actually Alan introduces himself a little bit at the start of this video as well. So maybe we'll just hand over to him.
So hi, my name's Alan Radbourne and I work for the UK Centre for Ecology and Hydrology as a science project manager. So that means that I work on lots of different projects with a specific focus on sustainable land use and how we can farm really sustainably. One of the main projects that I work on is called the Fabulous Farmers Project, which is a Northwest European-wide pilot-run study looking at how innovative methods for functional agrobiodiversity, or the sustainable regenerative practices as you might know them, can work to reduce our pesticide use or improve soil health or increase biodiversity through a whole system approach, but ultimately that it is functional so that it has a benefit for the farm business. And so that's a really exciting project that I work on, and hopefully will feed into just this really short introduction from me today. Also, should just say I am also a church leader, so me and my wife planted a church on the island of Anglesey about 4.5 years ago. That is quite an exciting adventure. And then as well, we own a 12-acre smallholding on Anglesey with pigs and ducks and sheep and chickens and bees and a shepherd's hut as well. So we're kind of exploring the land and our relationship to it ourselves as well. And all of that with our young family. So we have 3 boys, or our 3 mighty men, who are all under 5, a lot of fun, keep us very busy, but they love to help out on the land as well. So that's a little bit about me. But I'm here today to talk to you about how farming is increasingly under pressure to shift towards sustainable land management techniques while maintaining or even increasing our food and energy sufficiency as a nation. And although there are many challenges to do this, there are some really excellent examples of this happening. And then when you link that to the church having a significant land holding, with much of this being agricultural land, that can include like prime agricultural land, the real food producing stuff, the grade 1 and grade 2 lands. So that means that being this major landholder in the UK, the church has a real key role in supporting and enabling this sustainable agricultural transition. And now the process is not easy, and it is complicated by many factors. For example, government payment schemes, tenancy agreements, the role of land agents. Yet as the landowner, there is a responsibility, and I would even say a theological mandate, to find ways to support this transition towards sustainable agriculture. And I should say as well that I have seen a growing desire within the church and its people to make this change and to see how its land holdings can be a blessing to our nation. And the land ownership role and relationship of the church to its land is very complicated. Yet that shouldn't mean that it shies away from engaging with these difficult questions and envisioning a new way of accelerating the sustainable land practices happening. Like church dioceses can help environmental plans and work closely with their land agents to listen to their farming tenants and to equip them to confidently make a change. Like one of the key first steps to encourage all tenants is to undertake a farm carbon audit and to make a plan for change of how to improve this. This change doesn't have to be groundbreaking. In many instances, it can be just simple, small alterations in approach and management that can make a big difference around fuel use or the use of land in certain ways. It can be very simple, yet of course it can also be more intentional or even larger scale changes that can ultimately have the greatest impact. For example, incorporating more trees and hedges into the margins of a farming system, reduced tillage methods, or reducing fertilizer and pesticide use are all beneficial steps for the whole farm system. Focusing on animal welfare, natural crop protection and shelter, and ultimately the soil, improving the soil health that will then benefit the farm for years to come. And of course, the decisions on what to do and how to do it ultimately should always land with the farmer, who has a business to run and will likely know better what is suited to that specific parcel of land. However, with engagement and communication from the church as the landowner to the tenants across their portfolio, with encouragement and in many cases a permissioning to even a support to undertake these measures, whether that is through financial support or just mobilising the people of a church community to get into the farm and help and support, to replant up hedges, to plant new trees, to do whatever it is that can help support as a community together. There is increasingly more and more information and inspiring examples of regenerative, sustainable farming on small and large scales, with programs like the Fabulous Farmers Project that I work on, or the Innovative Farmers Program. Like, do take a look at both of those and loads and loads of other examples. There are so many great things happening across regenerative agriculture that is really the future of where we are going, to be able to produce sustainable, good food, but in a regenerative way. So in summary, reducing emissions on agricultural land is high on the political and cultural agenda, while the pressure to produce high quality food to feed the nation remains central to the farming community. And I believe the church has a vital and possibly very exciting role to play in pioneering this engagement. And from history, we can see that when the church catches a vision for change and engages its people and resources in it, it can make a lasting positive impact. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Alan, for recording that video for us. And it's really helpful just to kind of bring in some of the farming issues which are key to this report, really. So I'm going to hand over now to Sharon Hall, the campaigns officer leading on church land use with Operation Noah. And Sharon's going to introduce the key findings of our new report, Church Land and the Climate Crisis.
Thanks, Holly. So the report that you can see hopefully on my screen to the left there has been published today. It is available on our website, operationnoah.org, and there are also going to be paper copies beautifully printed on recycled paper from a climate neutral press. So if you would like those, do get in touch with us as well. So in this short time, I'm going to introduce the report, tell you the key asks of our campaign, and talk about what can happen next. So that's me. I am the named author on the report, and it has been my joy over the last months to bring together contributions from a range of colleagues and consultants. And I want to give thanks to them, for the team at Operation Noah, for all their input to the report, but also to our consultants, three of whom you've met today, Hannah, Andy and Alan, but others who we thank in the report as well, who've been part of this conversation and helping us to try and highlight what we think are the most key issues that will make the most difference in terms of climate mitigation in particular. So giving you an overview of the report, I know probably the contents on the left is a little bit small to read, but that is the actual contents from the report. So it does start with a background context, introducing the climate crisis, not assuming a lot of knowledge already. And it is written for a church audience specifically. So it does draw on some Bible, some theology about why we think it's important for the church to care about creation, and why we think the use of land is a theological issue, and that this is God's land and we need to take seriously our responsibilities to care for it. And then it focuses in on the church land topic. It presents three priority areas, which I will introduce to you shortly, and it ends with some next steps and what we hope are going to be some useful resources for people who are interested in taking some steps on campaigning or making some changes in their local diocese or areas where they have influence, if that's nationally as well. So Hannah's already talked to us helpfully about what land is owned by the Church of England. We know that some of it is owned centrally by the church commissioners, more as investments, but also individual dioceses around England, 42 dioceses also have land, some much more than others. And in terms of how the land is used at the moment, it's already come up that actually a lot of the land is agricultural land. And so that has influenced the suggestions and recommendations that we're making in the report, is from where we're starting. So other landowners may own very different land, and there might be quite different recommendations that you might give, but these are more tailored to the Church of England's land in particular. So how land is used, the report goes into more detail about some of the negative impacts from land use in terms of emissions from animals, vehicles, fertilizers, pesticides, but there are also positive uses of land in terms of carbon sinks. So both trees, peat, grassland, all of these areas can have a positive climate impact because they absorb carbon dioxide emissions. There are some complicated factors in these issues where the land is actually worked by tenants. There may be limited control in terms of some of the choices that are made. And there are also this key term of trade-offs. When we look at what's best for climate and some actions which might be considered to be great for absorbing carbon dioxide, they might not be so great for biodiversity. And actually we want to consider what's good for all God's creation as well as the climate issues. And then different priorities that the church has. Clearly there's an aim to be raising funds which are then used for church mission. So we don't want to be against the church making money off land, but it needs to be balanced with consideration of what's good for communities, what's good for nature, what's good for the climate. So the three main areas that we identify within the report as priorities for church land use are these: growing trees, protecting peatland, and reducing farm emissions. And I've got different slides which will explain a bit more about these, but picking up on some of the issues that have come up already, particularly from Andy and from Alan in their talks. So in terms of growing trees, mature trees do absorb significant CO2 emissions, more than the new saplings. So if there are mature trees to protect, and globally deforestation is a massive issue, and the report mentions briefly some of the impacts of perhaps our food and buying choices that have caused deforestation around the world, but the main focus is on land in the UK. So this need to choose suitable trees, and most of the advice is to choose mostly native trees, although the point that Andy made about bringing in some trees from warmer climates is increasingly important as well. But trees that support ecosystems, not just the trees that absorb the most carbon. The notion of not just planting trees, but actually growing trees. There are some tree planting projects that have celebrated large numbers of trees, but they actually haven't gone on to survive. So we need to look more long-term at how we support trees to grow to maturity, so as they do absorb more emissions. So we do want to increase tree cover on church land. It's not the only thing that's good in terms of the carbon sink, but it's a key one. So within the land that we've been talking about, we want to look at things like agroforestry, which is growing trees alongside crops on farmland, trees and hedges and margins. And within the report, there is information about tree growing schemes, including some which supply free trees. Peatland is another really important carbon sink, but degraded peat, and sadly most of the peatland in the UK at the moment is quite badly degraded, is releasing significant emissions. 4% of the UK's emissions at the moment come from degraded peatland, which is a huge figure. So taking that seriously, we also know that peatland includes rare habitats and supports wildlife. So we're asking the church to identify where it has peatland within its land holdings. We know that there's an area within the Cambridgeshire Fens, but we think there's probably more. There may be smaller areas, but areas that are important to protect if it's healthy peatland, or work to restore. And restoring peat is not a simple task. We've got a short video that I'll show shortly, which perhaps really highlights the need to be working with local partners, people who really know their stuff in terms of how best to restore peat. So that's one of the recommendations as well. But restoring peatland has all sorts of benefits for local communities around water security and flood control and filtering water as well to cut out pollution. And then the final area that we talk about within the report is the one that Alan was just talking about, looking at emissions on farmland. And because so much of the church-owned land is farmland, this had to be a key priority within the report. So farming does cause emissions, but also there are carbon sinks that are potential within agriculture. If you don't disturb the land so much, if you do plant some trees, there can be carbon sinks within farmland. The point is made within the report that actually reducing food waste is a really key climate impact. So it's not just on farmers to reduce emissions. Actually, if a third of food gets wasted, which is the statistic I've heard, then actually everybody has a part to play in reducing the emissions that were used in creating that food that then we didn't even use. But the general measure that we're promoting in terms of reducing farmland emissions is to take stock of the carbon and other greenhouse gas emissions on land, because we know that different measures will suit different farms and different models of farming. So this idea of a carbon audit, measuring the emissions from the farm, and then identifying changes that suit that local farm, that local area, and then finding ways that the church can work with those local farm tenants and build community. They are our key recommendations on farmland. So in summary, I'd like to really encourage you to download and read and share the report. It's only 16 pages and it does have lots of pictures. And I would encourage you to request some copies, hard copies, if that would be useful to convince people in your local diocese or area to take these issues more seriously. There are lots of useful resources and links in the report on these key areas of trees and peatland and farmland. I want to invite you to get in touch if you would like to be part of making some progress on these areas and campaigning with us. And then my email address is on the slide, and we'll also share it in the chat box a little later. So yeah, really welcome you to, doesn't have to be experts or people in particular church authority, but interested parties who are keen to be allies on these topics. We would like to find ways of working with you and supporting what you might do in your local area. So that's me. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sharon, for summarising that down for us. And I hope it does encourage people to want to download the report, which is on the Operation Noah website. And as Sharon mentioned, restoration of peatlands is a key priority within the report. So we're going to also share a short video now from the Great Fen Partnership. And this is a project doing some really important work creating and protecting peatlands between Huntington and Peterborough. So yeah, we'll just get that one up on the screen as well.
Hello, my name's Kate Carver. I'm the Great Fen Project Manager, and here we are in the Great Fen in Cambridgeshire. So the Great Fen is a visionary idea, landscape scale conservation. What we're doing is using nature-based solutions to really change the face of the earth here, changing it from brown to green. So the Great Fen started off fairly small, but now, some 20 years on, we've got over 4,000 acres managed for nature and also for people to enjoy. So here we are at our waterworks site, where we're using nature-based solutions to create new forms of agriculture, creating new income streams, benefiting nature, but most importantly perhaps tackling climate change.
Hi, so I'm Jack Clough. I work at the University of East London on the Waterworks project here in Cambridgeshire, and we're learning more about peat landscapes all the time, all the benefits they bring mankind, such as climate change benefits, water purification and nutrient retention. So wetlands are really amazing. We've historically damaged them, which is causing a lot of climate change issues. For example, this field, before we put any plants in, would be releasing 30 tonnes of carbon per hectare. Per year, which is quite a lot, and by raising the water table, we've now got that much more reduced, and we're going to be monitoring that over time. So peat is an amazing resource. It holds more carbon than all the vegetation in the world added together. Around the world, peat is something like 3% of the land area and stores 30% of the world's carbon. So it's really an undervalued resource. Peat's pretty amazing stuff. It holds 20 times its own weight in water. So when you're walking on it, you're actually walking on something with less solids in it than milk. It's about 95% water beneath my feet.
Hi, I'm Lorna Parker, Great Fen Restoration Manager here on the Great Fen. The Great Fen's a massive project with a real opportunity to bring hope to you. Climate change is terrifying, the impacts of climate change feel overwhelming, but what we can show here at the Great Fen is not only can we make a difference, but we genuinely are already making a difference to climate change. So what we've been doing is looking at plants that can grow with their feet in the water. It's really important to protect the carbon in our peat soil by raising the water table, and we need to replace traditional farming crops like potatoes and onions with something else that farmers can grow. So hope's really important. I've got children. I want to pass on this world a better place to them and change things for the future in perpetuity, giving solutions for all of us that we can work on together, connecting people with nature and saving our world.
Great. So what we'll do now is we will move on to the Q&A section of the webinar. So if we bring back our speakers, and thank you very much everyone who's been submitting their questions in the Q&A box. We'll just pick some out that you've asked, and I'll direct them to the speakers. Okay. So I know that Andy, you've got to dash off a little bit earlier. So I think first of all, we'll go for a question that's directed to you. So Andy, the first question, should we really sacrifice our species-rich grassland, aka our graveyards, for planted non-natives forests? Yes, we have radical change in land management. Yes, we need radical change in land management in the UK and abroad.
That's a really good question, thank you. There's a trade-off here, and the reality is we've seen from the video we've just watched, you do not want to be planting trees in peatlands if you can at all help it, because actually what you'll do is cause more damage than good. The reality as well is that our insects need sources of pollination, and that means really good wildflower meadows in our churchyards can provide an enormous biodiversity benefit. And their root structures can help bind soil, which helps keep the carbon in the soil. And so tree planting is not the only option. And certainly if we can use native broadleaf trees rather than species that are brought in from overseas, that is always preferable. So that would be the key. The reality is that climate change is running away with us. And as a result of that, we are going to have to be increasingly creative in what we do with our land. And that also means looking at peat. So I've just been out in Northern Ireland looking at peat bogs. And one of the realities there is the peat bogs are drying out during the summer and they are under immense pressure. And when they burn deep underground and release a lot of the carbon they've stored. And so using trees around the peripheries of peat bogs to help reduce temperatures and help lower the impacts of climate change and create fire breaks are critical aspects. So it's about being creative, imaginative, and recognizing that trees are not the only answer, but in the right place at the right time, they can be a really good contributor.
Fantastic. And I'll just, we don't usually do this, but I'll just direct the second question to Andy as well, just because I know you do have to leave earlier. But another one that was directed towards you, Andy, was about how to get the kind of message and vision that you put across at the diocese level. So that's from someone who is a member of their diocese environmental group. So yeah, whether there any of the things that kind of can be done at the diocese level.
So absolutely, and I think the starting point there is to encourage anybody who's thinking, where on earth do I start, to get in touch. So we have cathedrals now partnering with us on land. We have dioceses, which are Eco Church award-winning dioceses, looking at land as a whole and being quite creative and imaginative about how to approach it. And we've got major landowners who are strongly connected to the church, who are looking at scale, at change. How do we do farming better? How do we do it in a way that's climate resilient? And so, yeah, if you are in a place where you're thinking, I've got no clue where to start, then please do get in touch. It's andy.lester@rocha.org, and we'll be able to point you to partners, organisations, dioceses that are taking action for nature at scale, wanting to make a difference. And we're very happy to do all we can to help and inspire.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Andy. We've got another question here, which is directed to Hannah. So I'm going to combine two questions, actually, because I think they're kind of linked a little bit. And the first one might...
Hannah, you're breaking up somewhat.
Yeah.
Uh-oh. We're waiting for the exciting question, Hannah.
Might be,
you might need to repeat the question, Holly, if you can hear us.
It was very tense.
Yeah,
Waiting
it's got to be a really good question.
I have access to a question document, so I might ask the first question that's been allocated to Hannah and hope that I'm not jumping the gun.
I can see it too, Sharon. Shall I could read it out and then respond?
Yeah, do.
Lovely. So a couple of questions. Thank you, Sharon. I completely forgot I could see that. A couple of questions around land owned by the church commissioners. So the first one, a local nature reserve, I'm told, is owned by church commissioners and managed by Staff's Wildlife Trust. Does that mean that it belongs to the Anglican Church? Yes, it does. Yes, it belongs to the church commissioners. And a related question, to sort of clarify, if it's helpful, the church commissioners are one of the national investment bodies of the Church of England. So they manage church assets to bring in income and to secure the financial future of the church. So they operate as a distinct investment body to, for example, individual dioceses. We've got Holly back. Holly, I'm just mashing together the two questions that are around church commissioners.
Thank you very much.
The second question says, church commissioners own a large area of disused quarry near us. It's designated for building, but hasn't been taken up for 20 plus years, and informal advice from council says it won't. Community uses it for regeneration amenity. How do we get commissioners to release it for amenity/wildlife? That's a really good question. One of the things that I would maybe suggest doing is inviting either a couple of you that are local church members writing to the church commissioners directly to ask them. A second one would be to approach one of your diocese representatives at General Synod and ask them to put a question to the church commissioners directly at General Synod about that piece of land, because the church commissioners will have to reply, and that will be in the public record, the response to the question. If you want advice about how to frame a question for General Synod or how you could go about that process with your diocese representatives, then I'd be very happy to help you out with that. But that would be one way to get directly in touch with them and inquire about a particular bit of land.
We lost Holly again.
No, you don't. Thank you very much. I'm going to keep my video off just so that my bandwidth is a bit lower. But thank you very much for answering that, and apologies everyone for the signal difficulties. The next question is for Sharon Hall. So given that young trees absorb far less carbon than mature trees, is it too late for tree planting? Do we also need to be actively conserving mature trees?
So I think, as I said, conserving mature trees where we have them is important. I know there are sort of local activists who've been, you know, really determined to protect local trees in their area that are threatened by development work and so on. And absolutely, mature trees around the world need protection from deforestation. But I think there are still benefits in planting new trees if they are the right sort of trees which have capacity to grow within the climate. We need more new trees. We are cutting down trees through forestry projects. I've seen predictions which are saying that the carbon absorption from trees in the UK is going to decrease because we're cutting down trees more quickly than we're replanting. So we do still need to be replanting trees, absolutely. Yes.
Thank you very much, Sharon. And another question directed to you is, what considerations are there in the report about using properties for climate adaptation, local resiliency, temporarily displaced people, and disaster relief?
So it's not a major focus of the report, although I'm not going to say that each of those things aren't really important. I think if the conversation can happen locally about what is needed within our land, what is needed within our buildings, these are key priorities, then that helps all of these issues to be raised and taken more seriously. The reason that the report has focused on these three main issues that we've been talking about today, on tree growing, on peat restoration, and on looking at how we can improve farming practice to be better for carbon, is because we think these have the greatest climate mitigation potential. So that's why we focused on those, but they're not the only good things that we can do for the climate. There are so many other things as well. I don't know if one of the other speakers wants to come in on this question as well, but there were other questions about, what about grassland? This is good. So there's all sorts of good things that can be done. It's not just these three things, but we've tried to focus on three main things for the report.
Fantastic. Do any of the other speakers want to say anything on that, or should we move to another question? Fantastic. Okay. One question generally is how people and campaigners can get involved. And does anyone want to have a go at answering that one?
I can happily make a start from the kind of a Rocha perspective, and I'm sure Hannah and Sharon have got many other things to say as well. As far as a Rocha is concerned, one of the things that we are trying to do is to engage individuals in local action. We've got a program now called Wild Christian, which provides people with email access to kind of top stories and best ideas of actions that you can take for nature, either in your church or in your home or in your workplace, and where we really try and tap into other people's local knowledge to get the best possible ideas. So that's something that we're kind of actively engaging with, and it's just, I think the thing that's blown me away has been the number of people who read what other people are writing and think, I've got a really good idea, let me share it. And the amount of creativity that is in the church out there right now is just unbelievable. We often sit there thinking, I don't feel like I can make a difference, but the reality is we are full of amazing ideas. It's just we need the space to be able to share them, and to have the grace to really listen to each other. And to realize that, you know, folks like me, you know, I've been in conservation science for the last 20 years, and I suddenly realized how little I actually know. And then you get somebody who's only been in the wildlife world for less than a year and has come up with an idea, and you think, wow, why didn't I ever think of that? So this is about creativity and grace and listening to new voices and being prepared to think differently.
Yeah, just quickly as well, you know, there's lots of great suggestions for how to get involved that Sharon can give you from the perspective of the report, but also, you know, and I've noticed a couple of comments or questions around how can we partner with people? We don't have the resources ourselves. And, you know, even one of the things I think has been most exciting for me has been when I've seen Christians, churches, you know, at the parish level, at the diocese level, looking actively to partner with non-Christian organizations who have been doing this work for a really long time and are really passionate about it, have the knowledge, have the expertise, and really want to be involved and invested in their local community. One of the churches that I'm familiar with partnered with a local wildlife conservation organization to manage their churchyard for them, because they didn't have the resources to do it themselves, but it was a beautiful space that was a disused, it was an out of use churchyard. And now it's a beautiful wildlife area. So those kinds of possibilities are there as well. We don't all need to be individually experts, although of course it's exciting and empowering to learn some of this stuff. But you can also partner with people who have more knowledge than you, both inside and outside the church. And it's a really wonderful opportunity to build relationships as well, where they might not have previously existed.
I mean, part of what I might consider the Operation Noah model has been to see where good practice is happening in dioceses and where sort of on a smaller scale things can happen, and then using that to influence and impact the wider church. So I think on land use, that is what we're looking to do, although we would love to be having conversations with church commissioners. We're also interested to be working at diocese level, seeing what good practice there is, sharing some inspiring examples, and as Hannah was saying there, helping making connections between different groups, different individuals, and seeing how there can be progress on these issues. So encourage people to get in touch.
Thank you very much. We've got a bit of a technical question for Andy. So regarding peatland, how important is it not to burn heather, a common practice where it is used for grouse shooting?
The answer is it's very important unless you're passionate about grouse.
You mean unless you're passionate about shooting grouse?
Yeah, shooting grouse. Yeah, no, exactly. That's right. Thanks, Hannah. Yeah. So the reality is that the minute you start to move into a regime where you have even local, what are called muir burns, where so these rotational burns, any burns in the current climate is bad news for the peat. It's bad news for the regeneration of a wider variety of vegetation. And it's actually not always good news for the heather either. And so it is a big challenge. I would just say that the debates between grouse moors and the conservation movement has led us to some very entrenched positions. And so it's hugely important that as a conservation movement, as a faith-based conservation movement, we listen to those who own our uplands and understand some of the issues and challenges they face, both economically and environmentally, and try and find ways of creating new ways of working, new ways of communicating, which is what Hannah was saying a little bit ago. And last year, Hannah and I were involved in an Uplands Land Conference where we began to explore some of these issues with farmers, with the farming community, and with some of the major agencies. So it can be done. But in short, heather, burning, grouse shooting, not great, debate, but possibly not here.
Thank you very much. And a question for Hannah. So is keeping trees already planted, such as hedgerows, should that come before tree planting?
Yes, of course. Yeah. The two things are not at all in competition with each other. And one of the most wonderful and exciting things I've ever done in my life was plant a hedgerow and learn how to kind of weave one together. And to learn, particularly, I mean, one of the, just as an aside, obviously the biodiversity and ecology benefits of hedgerows are significant, but also there's a significant amount of local and cultural regional knowledge that's lost when we abandon hedgerow laying. And different parts of the country have unique practices when it comes to hedgerows. So I think when we talk about protecting hedgerows, protecting the wildlife that lives in them, talking about the implications of losing them, we can talk both about the ecological and biodiversity benefits of hedgerows, and also the fact that we're losing a significant part of this country's culture and its relationship to land. Those things go together. So yeah, of course that's the case. You know, I commented a minute ago in the chat to another person that this is just one report that's talking about one small aspect of this very, very big picture. And so, of course, there will be lots of things like the protection of hedgerows, like adaptation, that we haven't been able to cover in the ways that we might if it was a much bigger report. But that doesn't mean that these things are either or. We're beginning with a very small number of suggestions to start a conversation. And what's been really encouraging about this event has been seeing so many enthusiasts and experts in different areas who are passionate about different parts of land management. And so by no means is this the final word in what the church should be doing. This is to begin with where we think there is some real potential for resources that the church could be drawing on.
Holly, I'm going to have to shoot off now, but just to say thank you for some great questions, and it's been really lovely being part of it, and lovely being part of what I think will be a real landmark report for the church community. So thank you for having me with you tonight.
Thank you very much, Andy. Okay, and we've got one last question for Sharon. We have looked at using land as forestry as a diocese, but don't have the resources to manage it. How can we work with other partners to achieve this? Are there any partners you can recommend?
So I think if there's land that you have and you're prepared for it to be forested, then the Woodland Trust do offer various schemes depending on the size of land. So there are different links within the back of the report, which, yeah, depending on the area of land and the amount of time that you're willing to allow it to be given over to forestry, there are definitely partners there. Forestry England, I think, maybe have some schemes as well. So I would say have a look at the reports, particularly on the trees page and the resources page at the back, and then do come back to me. I can come up with a better answer when I'm at my desk with all my resources.
Great, thank you very much. I think that's all the questions we've got time for today. Apologies again for my difficulty with signal earlier. I'm going to risk it with putting back the video on, but if it goes a bit haywire again, I'll just turn off the video. But yes, hopefully that's ironed out any questions or given, you know, some extra context and information that people were after. So I will encourage people to download the full report, you know, to learn more about it, to share it with people. It is available on the Operation Noah website, and there's also hard copies available as well, if that's the format that you'd find more helpful. I'm just going to hand back over now to Sharon and Steph. Steph's one of our Operation Noah trustees, just for a few closing announcements.
So I was just going to say the same probably as Holly's just said. Please do download the report, please do share it with people, and please do get in touch if you're interested in working with us in this area. My email's been in the chat a few times, but it's sharon.hall@operationnoah.org. Thanks again to everybody who's been involved.
And I'm covering for Steph, whose internet dropped off. Great to see you all. I'm James, the Bright Now campaign director. So yeah, later this autumn, we'll be launching a report on church investment in climate solutions, such as renewable energy. So watch this space for the launch webinar, which will be coming up in the next few weeks. And if you'd like a taster of what's to come, have a look at our short guide. My colleague Bakani is going to put the link to our short guide on positive investment into the chat box. And last but not least, could your local church, diocese or faith institution consider joining the next global divestment announcement? Together with our friends at Laudato Si Movement, Green Anglicans, World Council of Churches and Green Faith, we're organising a global divestment announcement on the 2nd of November, the week before COP27. And we're hoping especially that many Church of England dioceses and local churches will join the announcement ahead of a crucial year for divestment at a national level in 2023. So Bakani again is going to post a link in the chat box where you can find out more information. So please do contact us if you're interested in getting involved with the announcement by contacting Bakani, our Bright Now campaign officer. And again, her email address is going to go into the chat box now.
Thank you very much, James. So yeah, before we wrap up, I just want to say a big thank you to everyone. So thank you very much to the team behind the scenes who are allowing the webinar to, getting it ready, allowing it to run smoothly. Thanks to our excellent speakers, as well as everyone who helped us create the report as well. And especially thank you for everyone for everyone who joined us today. I hope this has been an informative webinar, which has given you kind of a good basis and made you want to download the full report. I hope you enjoy the rest of your evenings. Thank you very much.